All right, so it's 1:30. We should get started. First of all, a very warm welcome to come to this small lecture, mini lecture. I'm here to basically give you a taste of what we do in the Department of English on the literature side. Okay. My name is Professor Leo, and I've been teaching here for ages. I won't tell you how long in case you work out how old I am, okay? But it's very sweet just now to bump into a former student of mine who is now teaching at a secondary school. So she is actually taking a bunch of her kids, her students over here. So I thought, that's really a lovely moment. Okay, so I'm currently teaching 2 undergraduate courses and 2 MA courses. So this one is one of the UG courses I'm teaching, and I'm also teaching a course called Romanticism. And I see that some students, my current students, are sitting here too, just curious to find out what this course holds. So first of all, just the title. Apologies for the horribly long title. So I call the course Ekphrasis, Encounters Between Verbal and Visual Arts. And let me tell you why I give it such a long title. Because at first I thought I'll just call the course Ekphrasis. But then on second thought, I thought, no, my goodness, if students do not even recognize that word, do not understand what that word means, then they won't come to take this course. So hence the long subtitle, because that's basically what this course is dealing with. All right, so I'd like to, first of all, talk about just what this word means. So this bit, can I? I cannot. Okay, so first of all, you notice that the word is spelled as EK, but it's also spelled as EC, so ekphrasis. And the intriguing bit about the word is that I check out the dictionary, the most authoritative dictionary, Oxford Dictionary, which says it should be pronounced as ekphrasis. But then when I was speaking to quite a few scholars, very well-known scholars, they said, oh, that sounds very strange. Shouldn't the word be pronounced as ekphrasis or ekphrasis? So what I'm saying is that just from the very fluid pronunciation of the word, you can get a sense of what a new field of study ekphrasis is. Okay, so that even the pronunciation is still divergent. Okay, so I'm going to pronounce it as ekphrasis, but I don't mind if other people pronounce it as ekphrasis or ekphrasis. Okay, what does the word mean? The very root of the word is composed of 2 parts. Ek means out, phrasein, which means tell, pronounce. Putting them together, the original meaning of ekphrasis is to speak out, to tell in full. And in ancient Greece, basically it started out as a rhetorical device. And as I'm quoting here from Oxford Classical Dictionary, so ekphrasis is exhibitionistic speech, vividly leading the subject before the eyes. So you notice that the term used in literature actually is trying to do something that visual arts do, to bring something vividly before the eyes, okay? And later on, after a few centuries' time, ekphrasis came to mean rhetorical description of a work of art. That's how the term came to us, and we're using it to refer to this special field of study, okay? The word did not enter into the English language until about the 17th century. Then for about half a century ago, roughly around the 1960s, did it become really trendy in academia. So there became a lot of studies on ekphrasis, okay? And gradually people came to a sort of standard established definition of the term by this scholar called Heffernan. And he defines ekphrasis as the verbal representation of visual representation, okay? Interestingly enough, Heffernan has been trying to emphasize how verbal and visual arts, they have a kind of antagonistic relationship with each other. So in other words, they're like enemies, and there's a sense of rivalry between the two arts, okay? But that gradually changed in the last several, 3-ish decades, and now scholars increasingly emphasize not the hostility, not the rivalry between the two mediums, but actually the interaction between them. So I'm quoting the last bit. It's a very recent scholarly work, which is talking about ekphrasis as an encounter. So that's why I use the word in the subtitle of the title of the course, okay? So it's an encounter between emotional individuals, between art and life, between the reader and the text, between the present and the past, and between scholarly disciplines, okay? So it's more unequal sort of, two-way traffic, if you like, between these two mediums of representation that this course is interested in exploring. Oops. Okay, all right, so why do we study ekphrasis? What's the point? Why does it matter? My rationale is this. Because basically, right from the beginning of civilization and culture, ekphrasis was there. So if you look at the slide, the so-called illuminated manuscript, right at the beginning of Western civilization, that's ekphrasis. That's an encounter between words and images. Or if you think about ancient Chinese painting, which is often accompanied by poetry and calligraphy. So once again, it's a kind of ekphrasis, all right? All the way throughout culture. And here I'm using an image of the dusk jacket of a very famous novel by Virginia Woolf. The novel is called To the Lighthouse. Maybe some of you have heard of it. But the interesting thing about this dusk jacket is that it was designed by Virginia Woolf's sister, Vanessa Bell, okay? In the ancient time, people used to call visual arts and verbal arts as sister arts. So here in this case, it's really literally, okay, sister art, because the pair of sisters, one is the novelist and the other actually designs as the visual artist, designing the cover for the book, all right? So part of my rationale is that it has been with us since the very beginning, the fountainhead of civilization. And the other part of my rationale is that people very often say that we are currently living in an age of images rather than words, okay? I'm sure every day when you scroll down your social media, Instagram, okay? I know people spend a lot of time just reading comic books, which is a wonderful example of contemporary ekphrasis as well. So I think by studying ekphrasis, we are not just looking back, but we also will gain a sort of insight to reflect upon our contemporary culture, okay? All right, so that's that. What do we study? So on the right-hand side, I've just put on the slide several images of the stuff that we study in the course. So basically, we're going to cover different art forms, paintings, of course, but also sculpture. For example, oops, here. Okay, so it's a sculpture called The Dying Gladiator. We're going to study Byron's ekphrasis of this particular sculpture. We're going to study ekphrasis of monument, Shelley's poem of a monument. We're going to look at ekphrasis of architecture. So that's the Colosseum, I'm sure you know, in Rome. We're going to study ekphrasis of artifacts, very famous shield, okay, and a Grecian urn. And then towards the end of the course, we're also going to cover briefly ekphrasis of photography, of film, and more contemporary digital media. Okay, so that's the art forms. And we're also going to look into different literary forms. We're going to spend most time on poetry, but we're also going to read fiction, excerpt, okay, not the entire fiction, and then drama as well, okay? So we're going to study all these great authors, starting right from the beginning of Western literature, Homer, who has the very first ekphrasis in his epic. So that image is actually, well, basically based on Homer's ekphrasis on Achilles' shield, okay? Then we're also going to read a little bit of Shakespeare, because I specialize in Romanticism, so we're going to study several Romantic poets' ekphrasis, including Wordsworth, Byron, Shelley, and Keats. Then we're moving ahead to read a little bit of Jane Eyre by Charlotte Bronte. So where Jane Eyre, the novel has an excerpt describing Jane Eyre's artworks. Then we're moving ahead to Victorian painters, including Dante Gabriel Rossetti. So the right-hand painting, this thing is not working, doesn't matter. So, and we're also going to read an ekphrastic poem by Robert Browning, moving all the way to the modernist era, W.H. Auden, and in the conclusion, we're also going to look at more contemporary stuff. Okay, so that's what we study. And just to make this a bit more specific, I thought I'll give you a taste of what we do exactly in this course by giving you a pair of works. I'm sure you have seen this painting, have you? Okay, right. So this is Van Gogh's The Starry Night. And you've probably heard of the song called Vincent, okay, by Don McLean. But I'm not going to talk about that song, but this is one of the most recognizable Van Gogh's work, all right? And then we're going to look at a poem. And let me tell you what's going to happen in an actual classroom. So I would usually invite students to just look at the painting and respond to it. Their initial impression, the general mood, and what strike them the most. Then we'll be discussing various details. Okay, for example, looking at this painting, the bright color is really very, very striking. Okay, the contrastive yellow and blue. And there's also the sort of out of proportion tree, cypress tree, right in the foreground. And then there's this little village and with steeples and houses and so on, okay? So we'll spend a little bit of time on that so that we'll move on to this ekphrastic poem, which describes the painting, okay? So this is a poem written about 100 years later after the painting was composed by American poet called Anne Sexton. I thought it would be helpful to listen to Anne Sexton reading the poem herself. Okay, so I'm going to play you the audio, and so that you can hear her own voice.
Starry Night. Vincent van Gogh, in a letter to his brother. That does not keep me from having a terrible need of, shall I say the word, religion. Then I go out at night to paint the stars. The town does not exist except where one black-haired tree slips up like a drowned woman into the hot sky. The town is silent. The night boils with 11 stars. Oh, starry, starry night, this is how I want to die. It moves all in its orange irons to push children like a god from its eye. The old unseen serpent swallows up the stars. Oh, starry, starry night. This is how I want to die. Into that rushing beast of the night, sucked up by that great dragon, to split from my life with no flag, no play, no cry.
All right, so back to the poem. And as I would do with the painting, after looking at the poem, I would also be inviting responses from students just to get a sense of how the poem has struck them and anything that they can pick up from the first time reading. But after that, we'll be looking more closely into the poem. And really, what this course focuses on is what the two mediums do to each other. Okay? And you see that I've highlighted various bits. That's how I usually go about reading a literary text. Just, focus on tiny little bits and then trying to put them back together again. So first of all, if we look at Anne Sexton's poem, she starts with a quotation from Van Gogh's letter to his brother, which says, "That does not keep me from having terrible need of," then a dash, "shall I say the word religion, then I go out at night to paint the stars." I thought it's interesting that the poem starts by quoting Van Gogh's words, not referring to the painting immediately. So the words, the verbal, okay, that seems to be serving almost a kind of bridge that sort of connects the painting with the poem. And what Van Gogh says here, talking about religion, and if you think about his painting, it does seem to be something beyond this world, beyond this mortal life, okay? And then he says, "Then I go out at night to paint the stars." The stars, something beautiful, something brilliant, maybe something eternal too. But he doesn't say that I go out to look at the stars. He says I go out to paint the stars, as if he is trying to do something through his painting to achieve something beautiful, maybe something eternal too. Okay? So that's the very beginning, even before the poem starts. And then if we look at what Anne Sexton quotes from Van Gogh's words and look at her poem, I've highlighted the bit that she repeats at the end of the first stanza and at the end of the second stanza. "Oh, starry, starry night, this is how I want to die." Okay? So this repetition of the same lines, we call it refrain. By this refrain, she seems to be picking up something from the quotation of Van Gogh that she uses. It seems that she is also talking about something beyond this mortal life. You might think, oh, this sounds suicidal. This is how I want to die. But that's not the complete thing, because she says, "Starry, starry night, this is how I want to die." So it seems that she is reaching out to something beautiful, something eternal as well. But she's not going to make a painting to do that. She's going to put these into words. So that's where the two mediums meet, if you like, and the two artists meet, encounter each other, because both of them seem to be very much struck by the eternal beauty represented by the stars, and they want to do something in their own medium to capture that sense of longing for something eternally beautiful. Okay? And then what the poem does as an ekphrastic poem is, of course, to describe what's there in the painting. So if you look at the blue bits that I've highlighted, the poem covers the town, the tree, and then the sky, the stars, the moon, and so on. But what's intriguing about the poem is that it does not just describe what's there that we see in the painting. What it does is to translate the painting with words. Okay? And this translation that Anne Sexton does, by doing so, she is indeed making a new painting, if you like. Okay? And I usually draw attention to some key features in that literary text. For example, in this poem, we pay attention, for example, to the verbs that the poet uses. I've highlighted in sort of brown. So here, for example, one black-haired tree slips up, and then the night boils, the moon bulges, the serpent swallows up, and so on. In an actual class, I'll be inviting how people interpret these verbs, okay? But here, I'll just note the interesting thing about each of the mediums. Because if we look back to Van Gogh's painting, it does have this wonderful sense of motion. If you look at the painting, as if, everything moves. But however dynamic the painting looks, it's still, okay, it's static. Going back to her poem, all these verbs, they seem to have animated the painting. And that's something that words can do. Okay, in other words, I'm calling attention to the peculiar features and qualities of each medium. And then the other thing that Anne Sexton does is to use a lot of figures which cannot be found in the poem. For example, describing this tree, she says, where one black-haired tree slips up like a drowned woman into the hot sky. You look at Van Gogh's painting, there's no woman. Okay, so it seems to be almost a kind of self-projection, but definitely it's a gendered perspective. Looking at the painting and reimagining the painting, okay? And then looking slightly below, describing the moon bulges in its orange irons to push children like a god from its eye. You cannot find a god, you cannot find children in Van Gogh's painting either. Okay, so this is her imagination. And then yet further down, the old unseen serpent. So yet another creature invisible in the painting, but serpent carries some religious connotation, obviously, okay? And that points backwards to Van Gogh's words in the epigraph. And then the last stanza, rushing beast, the great dragon, all of these are fantastic, beasts and animals, creatures in an imaginary world. Okay, so it seems that Anne Sexton has reimagined and remade the painting by all these fantastic imagery. Okay, and because these imagery are so fantastic, they're not to be found in this world, in this mortal life. There's a sense of, turbulence and violence. So the poem reads very surreal. Okay, it also, all these metaphors and similes, they sound very strange, very odd. So something very unconventional seems to be going on in the poem. And if you look back at the painting, Van Gogh's painting, it's also quite odd. For example, that tree is way too big. Okay, it doesn't really fit into the proportion and or the perspective of a conventional painting. So what I'm suggesting is that in our course, we'll be studying all these peculiar qualities of each medium and look at how they illuminate each other. Maybe something that we cannot really get just from looking at the painting alone or by reading the poem alone. Okay? And another point I'll just quickly make is that the poet does her work through words. But because this is a poem, she also does something that a painting cannot do, which is giving a voice to the painting, which is silent. The painting cannot speak, okay? But the poem actually gives a voice to it. And if you look at the poem, it's written with no regular form. This is what we call a free verse poem. But on the other hand, just now listening to Anne Sexton, you also feel it's a very strong sense of music or musicality to the poem. How does she do that? For one thing, she repeats the lines, "Oh, starry, starry night, this is how I want to die." And she also repeats other things. For example, at the end of the poem, so talking about, into that rushing beast of the night, sucked up by that great dragon to split from my life, with no flag, no belly, no cry. repetition. Okay. And another wonderful thing that she does is that although it is a free verse poem, actually you hear a lot of echoes which are made by rhyme. For example, hot sky, and then I want to die, and die also rhymes with I, and then I in the second stanza, die, I, until the end of the poem, cry. Okay, so what we do usually in our calls is to talk about such things, really to see how each medium speaks in its own language, and as I said, how each illuminates the other and shed new light on the other. So if I can draw everything together at the end, what this poem does is not just speaking of the painting, describing the painting, it also speaks for it, because a poem has a voice and the painting is silent. But most importantly, they speak to each other. Okay, it's the dialogue, it's the encounter that we're interested in exploring. All right, so that's, my little taster offered to you. And I'll be happy to take any questions, either about this course or about our program. So anyone, and we have student helper to give you the microphone so that you can be heard. Yes.
Hi. Let's just say that we were studying a poem like this in the course. How would that apply to our coursework? Would we have to write an essay on it, or would this just be an in-class discussion?
Okay, so what I have been talking about is what's going to happen in class. And then, of course, as a student, you'll be worrying about assessment and grading and all of that. So I give students a choice for the end of the term work. So they can either do a traditional essay where they pick a pair of works, a visual and a verbal work, and then write a commentary, a traditional essay on it. Or they can also produce their own ekphrasis. And then they need to attach a self-reflection of what they have learned and picked up from the course that inspired their own creation. So last time when I was teaching this course, I've read several brilliant creative works. So that was a pleasure, I think, both for students themselves and for me. And especially towards the end of the term, when everyone is overwhelmed with their coursework, they'd love to work on something slightly different. So that's what I did. Yeah. Okay, thank you. You can also ask about any general questions, of literature courses in or the department in general, if I can answer them.
Thank you for your sharing. I wanted to ask if you encourage more discussion-based classes, or more just listening and yeah.
Yeah. I do include interactions in class. And as I told you just now, usually we'll start by inviting, just more immediate and intuitive reactions to the artwork and to the poem or to the literary text to start with. And then, of course, it's a lecture. So it will be, me guiding students' responses. And remember that every course of ours will be structured like 2-hour lecture followed by a 1-hour tutorial. So in the tutorial is really the time that students will be talking to each other, and they will be discussing what they have learned in the lecture and asking questions and so on. So the very structure of our course facilitates discussion and interaction. Yeah? Okay. Right. I'm afraid we do need to stop here, and other people will be lining up for this venue. Thanks so much for being here. Okay? Thank you.